But we will dive right in here. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. This is our Ready, Set, Go 3-part webinar series on forecasting with your clients. And today is part 1. So today we will be sharing the approach to forecasting and really making sure that you're setting a super strong foundation with your client before moving forward into that planning phase. I will go ahead and share my screen here. All right, so as mentioned, today's session will cover part 1 of the 3-part series. So today we'll be focusing on laying that foundation with your client and really understanding how they define success, what gets them going, and how to begin to kind of look at the building blocks that will go into your planning with them. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our main real host today that will be sharing his insights, Ben Cooper of Amplify. Familiar face for some of you all. He is the owner, founder, CEO of Amplify, which is a firm focused on helping businesses reach their goals. He's really an expert at using Fathom and also working through these plans with clients and really getting them engaged. So super excited to have Ben here and sharing his wisdom with all of us. A little bit on what we will be going through today. And I should mention, my name is Rowan Eister. And for those of you that I have not met or worked with, I head up marketing and partnerships for Fathom's US team. Today, what we will be covering is kind of 3 aspects of laying that foundation. So we'll be going through the approach, any mindset shifts that you might want to consider before moving into offering forecasting services, how to think of your client's role, your role, etc. We'll go through defining success. So creating a clear definition of success, even with a timeline, some tangible ways to measure that success, getting the client involved there. And then finally, we'll get a little bit into taking those qualitative ideas and motivations for your client and moving them into the numbers. So what does it look like to kind of build that bridge from all of these exciting ideas into your actual forecast? And then obviously in our next session, we will get more into building out that plan in that more quantitative way. So without any further ado, I will let Ben take it from here and just kind of start by outlining his approach and where he might begin and just thinking about adding forecasting services.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rowan. So the temptation a lot of times when it comes to thinking about creating a forecast for a client relationship is to actually skip step 1, which is ready, and jump right into, give me access to QuickBooks, let me connect it up to Fathom, let's get into the numbers, because that's honestly, where a lot of us feel most comfortable, to start right with the numbers. And it can feel a little bit, like new territory to maybe take that important step before even getting into the numbers and really focusing first on the relationship. Really, the key to an aligned forecast, which when I say, what is an aligned forecast? What I mean by that is a forecast that all of today's current decisions are able to be connected to the longest term definition of success for the client. And what that does is it allows the client to see that, the monthly report that you might be sending that client that they're going to get in their email, they're going to be excited to open that because they're going to see that, the progress or the results of the previous month's business. That's going to give us more information about how we're making progress in the big picture. So it's tempting to kind of jump right into the numbers, but really starting with, the basic understanding. If you're in your client's shoes, really asking the question, why does this matter to me? Like, why would this be important to me? Because it can be a temptation to jump in and say, look how smart I am. I can build you this massive forecast and we'll apply all these formulas. And if you jump past, the really kind of understanding and unpacking the heartbeat behind why the person started the business in the first place and what they hope the business could provide for them, not just in a quantitative aspect, but also, what would success ultimately be for that business owner as they run their business? Because my background, I started Amplify actually working in the private equity world. And a lot of times the default definition of success can be, we're going to grow, we're going to make as much profit for shareholders. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it can create this impression that every business exists just to maximize shareholder value. Shark Tank, unfortunately, does a good job of kind of reinforcing that a little bit. And so what I have found is that the most successful forecast that I've ever built for business owners starts with, okay, we know how maybe other people might define success in business, but how do you, client, how do you define for your business what matters most?
Right. So really, yeah, if I'm an accountant or advisor, and I say this because I've heard this before, so I'm guessing it's a question from some folks that we have joining us today. But if you're comfortable kind of in the numbers and maybe in the spreadsheets or providing those more kind of standardized goals, and here's how you reach that goal of maximizing profit, let's say. What do my mindset shifts look like? How do let's say I'm trying this with the first client and it's a little nerve-wracking to move out of the numbers and into something that's a bit more mushy, unknown, personal. Any tips for shifting your mindset to kind of prepare for those more personal conversations and approach?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first bit of advice I would give is if you can find a relationship, a client that you feel comfortable with, taking a first step into some of these questions, and we'll get into some of these specific questions here in the next few minutes where there's a framework that I've put together. It's really almost like a mad gab, fill in the blanks with some goals, dates, so just to try to take some of the ambiguity out of defining success. So just a statement that is a little bit of a framework that I found useful. And then some key questions that really start with the qualitative information. Why did you start your business? Who are the decision makers? Some of those things. And moving from kind of answers that are words to answers that are numbers, and really translating that. So there are some specific questions that we'll get into that hopefully take some of the create some structure, I guess, if you're venturing into this conversation for the first time with the client. But I found it to be really helpful to start with a relationship where you feel like you don't have to jump in and perform or say all the right things. There's a temptation to, I got to make sure I sound smart. And if you go into a conversation trying to sound smart, what can happen, unfortunately, a lot of times is you may say word for word everything that you want to say, but you miss out on actually listening. You miss out on opportunities to be curious and ask follow-up questions about, so why did you say, why is it important to you to be able to hire a manager for your business? Or why is it important to you? So really the building blocks and really the pieces of this puzzle that we're kind of building ultimately in a growth plan and a forecast, we discover those pieces by getting into the mess a little bit and getting into a conversation that may have a bulleted outline, kind of like what we're looking at here. There's a slide with a few bullet points on it. But we're really having a conversation. And that's where the gold is. That's where the important value comes out, to kind of create that foundation, because even just in a relationship, Rowan, when you ask me a question and I tell you something that is important to me about my business, I now believe and know that you are aware of what matters to me. So I feel like
Right.
you're that much more in my corner. So you're that much more able to support me as I venture forth into the unknown world that is running a business, right? So even just the fact that, I feel heard, and as you guiding me, I feel like the person guiding me now understands who I am. They're not just putting me through a process that is a sequence of formulas that is just kind of a default way that Rowan might work with every small business owner that comes through. So it makes me feel like I'm getting a personalized relational approach to looking at my numbers, and that's really important. There is no checklist or bullet point or conversation script that accomplishes that. It really is starting with people first, and then certainly translating that into the same high quality, detailed, complicated forecast that we can build for clients. But my heart also goes to everybody who's tuning in right now, and who builds forecasts for people and puts intentional effort and time and energy into building reports, because we can have all the right numbers and we can have all the right graphs, but if we aren't connecting it to the heartbeat of the business, and really making sure it's tailored to what the business owner cares most about, all that work can end up sitting in an unopened email in somebody's inbox, unfortunately. So
Right.
I just know from my experience, it's most fun to work with a business owner where I know, oh, I can't wait to show them this. Oh, they're gonna be so excited when we hop on the Zoom call, because they're gonna see that, hey, here's that checkpoint that we're kind of aiming at, and the timeline that we're working toward. And isn't this exciting? October's numbers just came back, and look what it's telling us. And so the only way we can get there is by walking through the questions that we'll end up chatting through here in a moment.
Yeah, I think of it as more of like the look under the hood. And
Yes.
yeah, having that goal that you're working toward, like you just said, getting excited about getting on that call or giving them the update, that's pretty exciting when it's a goal that has some personal impact for
Yeah.
them. But you can't get there if the goal is just increasing profits or something standardized.
Well, and
Maybe it is,
it may
but
also
yeah,
be that their goal is to increase profits. So I don't want to throw that into a
right.
category that's like, but if I understand why they want to, I am
Yeah,
that much more motivated to do really great work for the client, and they're that much more motivated to show up excited about our meeting. Because the last thing I want to do is have somebody, be a just dead weight on somebody's calendar, where we have this meeting scheduled and they're like, do we really have to meet and talk through numbers again? Because, and that to me is a sign
right.
of them not connecting with or understanding the connection with the numbers that are being mapped out within the forecasting section.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. And I've heard that feedback so many times. Usually, if someone's approaching Fathom, they're looking for a more engaging component to give to their client. So I think a lot of folks fall into that boat of, my client's kind of glazing over, or they're not really processing the information I'm giving them. And how do I get them engaged?
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is the probably most crucial kind of building block, I think, for that, of really sussing out what will get them engaged and even excited to get your updates. Something we're all shooting for. So from here, I'd love to go through kind of, let's see, how you map out
Yeah.
the components and kind of set that expectation for the client in terms of what is this going to look like and where do they
Right.
fit in?
Yeah. And in this slide, you'll see at the top, it says you, and really this is something that I put together for business owners. So the you in this visual is the business owner. So like I was talking about earlier, the temptation for me when I'm leading a relationship is to think it's, I feel the pressure to make sure that I'm building something that looks really smart and all this stuff. But really at the end of the day, the pressure is not on us to go on the the journey that is running and growing their business. It is we exist to support them, right? So in that kind of hero's journey that they're on, we get to guide them through that. So the three steps that I like to, as I have a simple mind, so I need to simplify things. So it's like, if we can understand that heartbeat and understand what the hero, the business owner, cares about, then that becomes the thing that we have to keep everything aimed at. And it's an important thing, even when it feels like a relationship might be losing momentum potentially, or the conversation even is losing. How do we step back and realign the conversation even toward, like, okay, let's, I think we're in the weeds here. I see somebody's eyes glazing over. We gotta, go back to what's important. So setting that first, and this really is the ready, set, go, outline these three steps. So we're focusing right now in this conversation around, what is success? And I promise we're going to get into numbers here in a minute. So what is success? Because as soon as we can both buy into that, we're both looking at that same kind of important thing in the distance that we're going to align things to. The second piece, which is the set component. So, the next webinar that we're going to have being around looking more deeply at the number of relationships within the business. What is the vehicle that we have at our disposal to aim, as directly as possible at that definition of success? How can we look at what's available for us in the current decisions that are in front of us? We have a marketing expert telling us they can come double our revenue, and what are the decisions that a business owner is facing that could help us accelerate and make progress? And then third, being able to really leverage the scenarios and roadmap feature within the forecasting section and be able to say, okay, here's the plan. Like, here's, if the future continues to play out as we expect, here's what that looks like. If this, if revenue just takes off and we're able to find a supplier where we're able to produce our product for even cheaper and we're able to capture more margin, things could even be better. But then there's also some unknowns around if seasonality changes and if there's a downturn in the economy or whatever it might be, or for some reason our suppliers' prices go up and we capture fewer pennies of every dollar. We're able to at least put some boundaries on the region of darkness that we're kind of facing in the business, future months, kind of saying, okay, here's where we know we want to go. Here's the vehicle we got to work with. How could we get there? And what do these paths look like? And even when it comes to, you talked about mindset shifts earlier, Rowan, and it's tempting to even think, okay, I built a forecast, let's set it in stone. And the reality is every month, on that rhythm specifically, we have new information coming out. And throughout the month, the business owners, being, exposed to brand new decisions that they're being forced to make. So there's always new information coming into the picture. And that's really where our third part of our conversation, ready, set, go, is about, as we take steps into the plan and see it play out as we hope, or see it play out differently than we hope, what do we do with that? It can be tempting to say, well, I don't even want to go down that path if it's going to somehow make it look like I don't know what I'm doing as building a forecast. So even when it comes to setting expectations with your clients, it's important to also help them realize that, and they know this better than anybody, to be honest, that this is not a promise. Like, we can't guarantee that these are going to be the results that we get, because they know the unpredictable world that they are operating in, and how many things can change day to day, week to week. But the goal is, in the first, initial conversations, be able to, and really just the primary is like onboarding conversation, be able to do two things. One being getting a feel for, number one, what is I'm going to use a metaphor here, the puzzle metaphor. what is the picture on the box? Like, what is the thing that we're really saying, this is what we want to build? And
Right.
once we kind of paint that picture, then what we're able to do as we, learn more and more about how their business works, pop that hood open and see everything that's going on. That's where we can actually collect as many pieces as we can about, okay, so here's how much it costs you to produce one unit of this, or here's how much revenue you make per visit, or whatever. There are any number of variables that are, at work underneath or behind, what shows up in a profit and loss statement, for instance.
Right. Or the lid of that puzzle box, all of the tiny little pieces. It
Yes,
could be 1,000-piece puzzle or
totally.
500. But yeah, I think that's a really powerful concept of being able to stay dynamic and going in with the expectations both for yourself as that advisor, as well as your client's business, that
Yeah.
we're going to make some different plans with some components here. But if the expectation is for everything to go exactly to our plan
Right.
A, that's probably not realistic. If we've learned anything from the past few years, it's change is the only constant. So yeah, being able to kind of set that expectation of our role in the forecast
Yeah.
role too, I think is such an important piece.
Well, and
Um,
part of that too is, the if I get updates, where we're comparing a forecast that we kind of set in stone 9 months ago, for instance,
right.
there are feelings that I have as a business owner around, well, that's irrelevant anyway. So like I can't learn anything from last month's actuals against something that we thought was going to, you know, we don't even that's not even the reality that our business is operating in. So just, going through this process and approaching it in this ready, set, go, what's the heartbeat, what's the vehicle, what's the plan, um, it just builds trust and interest for the client. So it makes them think, okay, now this is something I can get behind. And then it makes me pay attention and keep, it's like any good show or podcast or anything that any of us like. There's a reason why we like those things. And when we see there's a new episode, you know, can't wait to see it. That's sort of the feeling that I want my clients to have, because it's kind of the next episode it's the next recap of the world they're living in, and it matters, because the progress. And maybe if we jump over to the next slide, Rowan, this will
Yeah.
kind of tie things together, because ultimately the progress that we, from a number standpoint, the progress that we put out in the plan has to connect back to what they care about. And I'll use Donna, one of my clients, just as an example for this. So
Perfect.
she wanted to, ultimately, the thing she cared about most was creating meaningful jobs for people who didn't have the same type of opportunities. This is a weighted blanket business, and it was a job that they were able to work with refugees from a different country and be able to create job opportunities that otherwise maybe wouldn't have existed. And so there's a meaning component that won't necessarily show up in a spreadsheet, right? You're looking at, or a P&L statement, for instance, you're looking at the labor costs and whatever. Well, the reality is, for a business owner who wants to, and this is just one small example of, the tension that can exist if you're taking a default approach to, my business has to be as profitable as possible. I got to rake in as much cash as I can. Well, what if you care about paying your employees really well? You're going to have to make a decision at some point, like, I don't want to just pay them the minimum amount that I can to make them stay. Like, that's not what I want. That's not the environment or the culture I want as part of the business that I'm creating. And so, for her, there was an important goal to raise prices on the product, and there were a number of reasons why that was possible. That competitors were charging a little bit more for their products as well, and so the decision that the business owner was facing, that Donna was facing was, what if we raise prices? And that can, the what if questions, really, that's where I find forecasting in general to be the most powerful tool or value to bring to a client relationship, because, and it may be just a litmus test in your mind to think about when you hear a client saying, I'm trying to figure out when I can afford to, open a new location, hire a new person. Should I raise prices? I have this investor coming in. They're trying to offer me capital, or this bank, or, I'm at a crossroads and I don't know what to do. And ultimately, that's where the ability to sit with the business owner in that complexity and translate what they're seeing, what they're experiencing into number form, and ultimately end up with a visual, like my favorite, and we'll get to this in the Go webinar segment, where we can have a graph that shows us, here's what we expect. If we did this, here's what that looks like. If we did this, here's what that looks like. Not just from a revenue standpoint, but from a profitability, cash in the bank position, which, to be able to provide a simple picture like that in the middle of a complex situation is so valuable to a business owner. So, but for Donna, I'll come back to this framework here. Her goal was to raise prices by a certain date, which in turn would allow the business to actually invest more in marketing. And if you invest more in marketing, and so that's the result component, I'm going to, ultimately, this is a framework that I want people to take and tailor, obviously, to, your add sentences, add blanks, do whatever you want to this, because this is something that I've just come up with after so many of these conversations where I found, how do I take something that may be really complicated and try to simplify it into a statement here that we can then translate into Fathom at the end of the day. So her goal was to raise prices by a certain date, which meant that they could afford to spend more on marketing, which would acquire new customers, more orders coming in. What happens if you're selling more units? You got to make more units, right? So then if you got to make more units, you got to hire more people, and there are more jobs that exist, right? And so being able to connect, ultimately what would be like, what if we raise prices? That alone, if you're familiar with using Fathom and you're comfortable in the driver section, which if you're not, that's where we're going, just so you know. So come with us on the journey, because ultimately, if we raise prices, immediately in your mind, you might be thinking there's a driver for that. I can have that variable plugged in to predict my future revenues. And if I can predict my future revenues, then I can see how more revenue coming in allows me to increase the ad spend, which could be another driver. It could be a value rule in the profit and loss statement. And if I do that, then I can see how that then there's more cash flowing through from a revenue standpoint that justifies, payroll can increase then. And, all the questions around, if this sequence of events goes in this order, according to these assumed outputs, it means that, Donna doesn't have to just sit back, cross fingers, and go, man, I hope I can create more jobs for people.
Right.
But ultimately, she can go, okay, if these things play out, here are the decision points in a certain sequence. And that's the roadmap feature at play. That's why I love that so much, because I've been trying to build in my spreadsheets a roadmap thing like that. So it saves me a lot of time. But, then, when I say, I know I will be on track along the way, because I will, checkpoint, what is a checkpoint in that story except, if we see that our customers are purchasing at the same rate, even though we raise prices, that's one of the scariest things for a business owner is, if I raise prices, won't that mean all my customers will leave?
Right. That's a big what if.
Yeah,
uncertain moment.
But honestly, one of my favorite things to do is to say, well, let's look at it this way. If you raise prices to, you know, 10% or something, or 20%, whatever the number is, how many customers would you afford to be able to lose,
Right.
and still make the same? Another relationship that I have, Adam, was literally starting to have stress-driven health troubles because he was overworking, right? And so as we looked at his business, there was an opportunity that he said, I know I'm not charging enough for my services. Well, immediately, we started connecting the dots with, okay, well, if you did start charging what your services are really worth and what you want to get paid, what would that mean for the number of client relationships you would have to have? He's a service-based business. And it's like, oh, if you raise your price this much, you can cut your relationships by 40% and still make the same amount of money, but there are your nights and weekends again,
Yeah, that's so
so
powerful.
all of that, I know we're like not even looking at numbers yet, but the important thing here, like, I'm motivated to help Adam or Donna at that point, right? Because it's like, I care about you, and I would assume most people here watching are here because we care about the people we're serving, and we care about the work we do. uh, we care about seeing the work we do help them as well. Like,
Right.
that's one of my favorite parts of uh, building out any kind of growth planning here, is that I see them win, and I want to work with people who I want to win as well. So it just helps all parties involved see that, like, man, what we're doing here really matters.
Yeah, right. And get someone fired up. Like that
Yeah.
example is great of being able to hire more and pay well-paid jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
That's impactful. And especially, for that specific person, that's what they're looking for. That's what they're
Yeah.
super excited about. So before we move further into the components here, I just want to ask for folks that are kind of looking at this for maybe the first time, or they're not fully rolled out in terms of this service offering and exactly what it's going to look like. They're thinking about those conversations. Obviously, getting to that why, that thing that gets
Yeah.
that person excited. And that's kind of the common thread we're talking about that keeps them engaged, and even excited to hop on their weekly update with you, is that why. It sounds like a lot of folks are, they'll approach you and they've pretty much got that why. But I imagine you've gone through scenarios where you have to do a bit of digging and kind of get them to open up
Well,
in the personal way too. Can you talk a little bit about,
yeah.
yeah, what that looks like, or
Well,
maybe
a
even a
cool way.
difficult client
I mean,
or client?
here's the neat thing. I have been called business therapist by more than one
I love
client.
that.
And the reason for that is, the unique role that we get to play. A lot of times we get to be neutral in their world. So, like, if we're having these conversations, that's why people use the word therapist, probably because, there are things that can be shared. When I, at the bottom of the screen, a tip that I point at that I found to be really practical and helpful is an exercise called the 5 whys, which is literally the five doesn't even matter. It's just, when somebody says something and you're listening and you're curious, why is that important to you, Donna? That you want to raise prices? Why? Well, if we raise prices, then we can afford to spend more on marketing. Well, why does that matter? Like, why do you want to be able to spend more marketing? Because then we'll be able to sell more units and get more customers. Well, why does it matter to get more customers? Well, then we'll get more orders. And you can just follow that sequence.
Yeah.
But the important thing is, nobody else may be asking them these same kind of intentional questions, to be honest. Um,
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
outside of like a certified financial advisor or a financial planner or someone who's asking them questions about, big life goals, big picture. Um, for the most part, unless they have, a strong mentor relationship or they're in some kind of entrepreneurial support group, generally I find that this conversation is unique for them, and that it's an opportunity for them to maybe also discover right alongside you a thing that
Right.
comes out of their mouth that they go, huh, I didn't know that I never realized that. Like
Yeah.
it's a pretty powerful thing, because you're helping them also connect. They're not usually, like, I've never had a client come to me and outline this statement to me before I ask. You know what I mean? It's like, because
Yeah.
they're
It's more
they're
of an
not able
exercise
to,
with them.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
not able to like self-formulate a such a clear picture. um but in the process, and that's what I find a lot of times, if I'm not clearly seeing the deeper importance of the work that they're doing, uh, or honestly, it might not be the right fit for me to work with that, because I have had some conversations with folks where they're saying, I'm just trying to increase revenue to flip this business, and I want to sell it as soon as possible. It's like, somebody can help you with that. But that's part of my why coming into the picture as well, where I just want a relationship. The practice of being curious and asking why and follow-up questions, and then saying, there it is. The more conversations you have, you'll have a sense of like, that's the thing that's really exciting. Like, that thing is cool.
Yeah.
And
You can pick up on what they're getting animated and excited about.
yeah, it's almost like that's a corner piece of the puzzle. What you just said, that's
Mm,
like, we're going to build around that.
yeah.
um, and then the second part of this, the whole translation um, into numbers, which we're about to do here in a second. The whole translation into numbers is uh, about moving from curiosity to resourcefulness, because I can be curious, as if I'm confident that I can take the things that I learn and I have a practical way um, to handle all the pieces of the puzzle, and I have an idea of how things can fit together. So if
Right.
we want, we can jump into that kind of final section here.
Yeah, yeah. So just to recap on this portion before we move ahead. So getting that success statement, building that really with your client. Like you said, Ben, I think it would be unrealistic to expect anyone to come to you with this built out.
Yeah.
But I love that not only does it have that emotional, here's what I'm really excited about. This is why I'm doing this. This is
Yep.
why I started the business. And it also has some of the structural, tangible, here's where I want to be by when.
Yep.
And you're setting up yeah, some constraints and definitions around it. So once we've got that from our client and from those conversations that are a lot of listening, like you said, you might be wondering, how does this move into the numbers and how do we link that in? So I'll go to our next slide here and we'll talk
Yeah.
more about bringing that qualitative statement into the quantitative numbers stuff and really the building blocks.
Yeah.
Um, and
And this
Ben,
is
I
this
will
is
let
really,
you.
yeah, this is really the transition point into and do you want to if you wouldn't mind going back to that last slide with the
Oh,
table, the
sure.
qualitative, quantitative,
Yes.
because this is really the transition
Right.
point between uh, ready and set. So
Yeah.
when we talk about going from qualitative to quantitative, I'm about to share my screen here, and it's going to be, there are a lot of numbers that are going to show up. The goal is not to absorb all the numbers I'm showing. What I want to present is a case study that we will continue in session 2 to take the numbers that are answers to some of these questions and build them out in the driver section in Fathom. So what I want to end our conversation on today is really, what is that hinge point into, okay, we're not just having warm fuzzy conversations here. This isn't just a therapy session, right? We have to move toward taking the numbers and doing something strategic with them. And so you see here that there's a qualitative and quantitative section, and for each of them, there are historical and current. These are 8 questions that I found really helpful to have as a little bit of a framework, an outline for the conversations that we have. So if we want, I'm going to share my screen and I'll show kind of how I would gather these answers. And again, don't be overwhelmed by the numbers that you're about to see, because do you see my screen right now, Rowan?
Yes, and
Okay.
super quick, Ben, before you kind of jump into this and give us a little bit of a teaser of what we'll get into in our next session. I know we're getting close to our scheduled end time. If anyone has questions, please send them through to our Q&A. We've gotten a couple of great ones so far. We will spend a few minutes at the end. We'll go over our time a little bit just to make sure we have time for some live Q&A. And if we don't get to your question, or if you have to take off, we'll shoot you an email and follow up with you on your question.
Perfect. So this is a made-up business. I love hot sauce. That's not the name of the business. I guess we'd call it I love hot sauce, but I love hot sauce.
I like it.
So what you see here is essentially what we just talked about, which is beginning with some draft of a success statement. And the reality is sometimes you can't identify all the checkpoints or the important components of historical and quantitative, like current decisions, all these things. So some of what is ultimately going to end up as, okay, here's what we're aiming for in our relationship. Here's what our definition of success is together. I'm gonna read this. Hot Sauce will hire a manager by 6 months from now, which will allow me. I know I will be on track along the way because I will begin generating $4,500 a month in new profit by 4 months from now. And the way, just specifically that $4,500 number, is one that is plucked from a question in that table that I identified, which is, what are the things you're considering as a business owner right now? One of the things that in this conversation, in this example, should I hire a manager? When could I hire a manager? Because I want to hire a manager because that means that I won't have to work as many hours. I can delegate some things and all this stuff. So some of, think of the success statement as really kind of an ongoing refining kind of definition that you don't have to put the pressure on yourself to nail it before you answer some of these further questions. But what you see here, just on the surface, again, I know there's a lot on the screen and you're probably trying to absorb it all. We will begin our conversation next week with these same numbers. And what you see here is a translation of, at the top, it's a lot of words. It's a lot of words about how the business started, who the decision makers are. And then we begin translating, transitioning into numbers. And so up top is kind of the picture on the puzzle box. And as we go through answering some of these questions, I'll read through these questions right now, but as we gather information around these questions, then we start to put some of the pieces on the table that we're going to say, okay, how do these all fit together? And that's really the foundation that we're going to be building on in the set component, the second. Rowan, do you have anything to add before I go through these questions real quick? I know we're like at the time right now, but.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, this will kind of lead us into what we'll cover in next session.
Yeah.
So I've seen some good questions come through. We'll wait just a couple minutes to jump into this.
Okay. So, just like, it's almost like a first date. Like, what questions are you going to ask somebody on a first date? You want to get to know, like, how did the business start? What was the origin of, ultimately when you started your business, like what problem were you solving? I find it really important to know who all the decision makers are going to be, because if the last thing that you want to have happen is you say, man, this is a great definition of success. And here's where we're going with the forecast and the picture we're building. But then you find out that somebody else is actually, there's a business partner you didn't even know about, or there's an investor who says, now hold on a second, that's not what we're here to do. And so what you really have to make sure you have a good understanding for is who are the decision makers. There's a note here about, it's a business owner, and then there's an investor behind the scenes, and they really appreciate visuals. I think we all appreciate visuals. I think that's why we all appreciate Fathom and everything that it's a beautiful thing to be able to look at numbers through. But just getting a feel for like, okay, ultimately when we put a story together and there's kind of a growth picture that we're going to put together, who are we telling that story to, and how do we need to communicate it to make sure that everybody's ultimately still, like, the word alignment is, like, to me, the key here with everything that we're talking about is just how do we make sure everything is one consistent, aligned effort, like we're all pulling in the same direction. So what you see here, then we can shift into like, and what are the big current decisions you're considering? Like, what are all the things you're thinking about? There are a few examples here. We'll spend more time, should we hire a marketer? Should we introduce a subscription model here? Can we increase our price, switch supplier? Should we hire a manager? Get a feel for like, what is the seasonality or kind of the year over year changes that you've been experiencing in your business, both from a revenue standpoint, but also from an expense standpoint. As you're looking at seasonality, even getting a feel for, and these numbers are things that they may say, oh yeah, I'm going to email those to you. You might gather way more pieces than you ever end up using, in building out a picture or the driver section. But ultimately, I find it really helpful to just say, tell me the story of last year. Like what's been going on, bring me up to speed, help me know what you've been experiencing. Getting into some of the unit economics can be really helpful to get a feel for, the cost per product, per bottle, per all this stuff. And I know I'm blowing through all this, but I promise it'll make sense as we build out in step 2 here. And then the last piece, what are the fixed expenses? Even a number like this, we're going to see more clearly and more in detail as, within QuickBooks or Xero or whatever accounting platform. So there are things that you're just trying to get a feel for, like, okay, tell me what you're seeing, business owner. Like, what are you looking at as you look at your business, and what are the things that are keeping you up at night? Honestly, like what are there's a lot, even just in this one section, like what are the decisions you're facing in that section alone? Like, this to me is the preview of the scenarios that we get to build out, where we go, oh, okay, here are the drivers that we need to make sure as we build this out that we can easily make adjustments to and make changes to. And you'll see, out of these numbers, this is just a kind of a blueprint sheet that I've put together that we'll walk through this next week, where we can see, okay, here's how these numbers, that these are the pieces are ultimately now kind of presenting themselves, in a logical sequence, where we can think about marketing spend that drives revenue, that, we have cost of goods, we have some fixed expense. We have all these components represented as we get into Fathom. So next week, we're going to spend our whole time pretty much moving from this picture into the driver section, and we'll look at some formulas there.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. So these are kind of our core building blocks, and yeah, great teaser to next week's session. We'll be going more in depth from here. And this session was really kind of covering off on that success statement, really, I think is the biggest key thing. And there are some different things to kind of shift and prepare for that. But once you've got that, next session we'll be diving into what comes next. So I will go ahead and share my screen, and we've got a few great questions that have come throughout. Thank you all. And as I mentioned, for those of you that were able to stick around, feel free to send your questions in. We also have a little chat bubble support. If you want to reach out to our team, you can find us there as well if you have to jump off this webinar. So the first one I want to get to is, how often should a checkpoint be done for startup type businesses? Or I guess to generalize a bit, like, how do you know what the cadence should look like for your client?
It's a great question. And I found the general, because, you know, there's a certain, where's the threshold where you say, now we need to overhaul a forecast because so much has changed. On some level, that's the primary test for that is if there's no longer meaningful things that can be learned from a comparison. Like when I said like a month, okay, another month has ended. If we're no longer paying attention or learning anything from the forecast telling us, you know, something new or something that we can take action as a result of, then that's an indication, that's a symptom for me that we're going to lose interest in the plan. It's somehow, we're so far off track somehow that the map isn't telling us anything, right? We're kind of like, we're kind of lost here. So there's a little bit of like, what if there's a refresh button on the GPS or something? It's like, so as far as a checkpoint, you know, we'll get into on the roadmap feature, like those are, I think the checkpoints being a, you know, this is a metric, this is a number that we want to make sure that we hit by a certain month. And I think of in the roadmap specifically, you know, being able to look at the different metrics and be able to see, you know, how are we doing, setting different thresholds. If we're missing our checkpoints so egregiously that it's demoralizing or something,
Right.
you know, there is just a like there's a unique balance of like optimism and hope about what's possible in the future, but nothing is more disappointing in the conversations to be like, and we're under our forecast again, and we're under again, and we're, you know, that's where you know, the need to update a target or update a forecast is also to just help people see that like we may not be getting the results we want, but we at least can understand why we're maybe not hitting our targets or what we might be able to do that would help us hit our targets. So being able to see some actionable, there's a helplessness that comes if you're like, I don't know, we've got this great picture and it's so exciting and we showed it to our investors, they're really excited, and then now we have to go like revise our whole story. You know, that's where the expected to me really has to be expected. It can't be like optimistic. That's where, you know, optimistic is a scenario. Expected, you know, the thing that we say, save this as budget, in my opinion, needs to be the thing that we really think is going to happen. And, you know, at the point where you go, the budget versus actual comparison is no longer meaningful, that's when it's time to make some changes and then click through the save as budget again so that the business owner goes, okay, now this is more rooted in reality.
Yeah, right. So start with that realistic picture and what that business and business owner really thinks they can do, or the shifts they can make in this amount of time. And then it sounds like kind of as you go forward, if that timeline's way out of whack, that's your moment to recalibrate, but start with kind of what they're committed to and what they feel is realistic.
Yeah. If it's still motivating and it's still exciting, I don't think, and it's still realistic, importantly, then it's worth keeping, I would say.
Awesome. Let's see, a couple other good questions about getting some of this content, and we will follow up with you on that. One more I want to pitch to you, and I know we've gone way over time. We'll just take a couple more minutes, folks, but thanks for staying on if you have. One question, so from someone I would imagine is kind of considering adding forecasting to their client relationships and service offerings. How do you, I have asked this question and heard this question from folks that I've talked with over the years on pricing for
Yeah.
something like this. Obviously we want to be delivering a ton of value to the client, but when you're looking at adding that, even like to your website, to your service offerings,
Yeah.
how do you kind of think about how to price it and how to make those calculations on, what you can charge for it to your client?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the complicated answer to that is that it is less of a commodity than the fact that you're getting into the most complex, most mysterious part of running a business and making decisions around, like, when I say you can bring simplicity through a growth picture, a forecast, to somebody who's in a really hard spot, that's the value there is so significant. And so
Right.
I always believe that the forecasting service can be the most expensive thing that you offer from a service. It requires I've seen challenges with, I've talked with folks who have existing clients who they provide some kind of lower level service, and they're trying to come in and provide a higher level service, and there are challenges that present in those relationships because you're trying to be seen as offering a higher level of guidance and value, yet the client might feel like, well, we're still just meeting for our normal quarterly check-in, so why would we all of a sudden pay you, and you already have all our numbers, so like, what's going on here? There will always be a great struggle for some of those existing relationships to all of a sudden be seen in a new light compared to a new client who you get introduced to and you say, great, there are no preconceived notions to work through.
Right.
Now, on the flip side, you don't have the existing trust to like get your footing on the forecasting side. So there's a little bit of a, the transition I would recommend is you say, look, I'm gonna make sure that I really want to provide the service in the first place. So I'm gonna get comfortable with it, iron out some wrinkles here with existing trusted relationships, maybe do something that's like a beta type service offering, and then be able to really roll that out, especially on the new client side. And and the challenge is, depending on the business owner, this is more of a value-based pricing thing, so there's a little bit less of a fixed price that you have to make sure you're like super competitively,
right.
So this is
There's
more
no magic
consulting.
formula.
It's consulting,
Yeah.
right? So it's the value is going to be to the business owner, what's it worth for me to get my nights and weekends back, or something
Right.
like that.
Going back to that why.
It's tied to their why. So what's the value a business owner might place on, well, I would definitely trade X number of dollars in my bank account for knowing that I'm on the right track and I have peace of mind. So it's different than like the value of knowing that my tax returns are getting filed on time, right? That's more of like a, not to minimize the importance of that, but that's more of a, is it done correctly, and follow the checklist, but this is more conceptual. And so unfortunately the answer is complicated, that it's, you could probably charge more than you think you can to the right customer. So I would say don't overinterpret the responses you might get from existing clients who push back on, like, you think you're worth what? It's more the new clients who go, oh yeah, that's cheaper than I thought you would say. And then you go, man, I should have like set a higher number or something. The advice I was given was, find the types of problems you want to solve in the world. Start doing it for people. When folks say, hey, this is really helpful, what would it cost to hire you to do this, then you, the final piece of advice was name and say a number that scares you. And I was like,
I like that.
okay.
Yeah.
And that's been an important piece of advice.
Yeah.
So because the temptation is kind of like, well, you know, how much value we're providing somebody, because they're the ones who get to determine whether it's a good deal or not, right?
Right. Yeah. And just owning that confidently, I think is
Yeah.
a powerful component too. All right. I know we had a few more questions come through. I think we have to call it here. I know we've gone way over, and thank you again for everyone that has stayed with us and tagged along for our Q&A.
Hey, Rowan, if we want,
yeah.
we could try to start next week with knocking out a few of the questions if they're important. So
That's a great
I apologize.
idea. I love that.
I talk too much because I'm excited about this stuff, and I just I know I rambled there. So but we could start next week also with answering a few lingering questions if we need to.
Perfect. I think we've got some good ones that will be well suited for our session next week too. So more to come on that, and we'll send you all emails if we didn't get to it too, just so you know that we've got an answer for you. So yeah, to tease a little bit on our next session, we'll be meeting at the same time next week, Wednesday at 11 a.m. PST, and we'll be going from ready to set and talking about really building out that plan with your client now that you know what excites them and what gets them going, what their why is, and hopefully you're engaged with that too. Yeah, how do you then translate that into the numbers and start looking at the building blocks of their business? So super excited to meet with you all again then. We will be sending out the recording of each session as they happen. So if you could make this one, but you can't make it next week, no sweat, you'll get the recording as well. Feel free to, as I mentioned, reach out to us with any questions. If we didn't get to them today, feel free to go to fathomhq.com. If you have a Fathom account, log in. Either way, you'll see the little chat bubble in the bottom right corner of Fathom, and you can reach our team there. But just want to say a huge thank you to Ben for sharing all of your wisdom and insights on this process for folks that may not know where to begin or just wanted some tools to kind of getting started. And I love that it got you excited and talking too. That's kind of exactly the concept we were talking about with getting to that why from a client and that being a place to start. So I think that's awesome. Really appreciate it. And thank you all, everyone who joined us today. We're so glad that you were able to take the time and hear more, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Rowan. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Thanks, everyone.